In this lesson, we'll learn how to start using ray trace shadows inside of 3ds Max. Okay, so in our previous lesson, we took a look at shadow map. And what we want to do now is take a look at a different type of shadow, which is called ray trace. It is basically meant to make up for a lot of the shortcomings of the shadow map type, but it does have some of its own disadvantages, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. So to create a light, again, this can be done with any of our light types. But what we want to do is, because we are using Metal Ray to render this, which we talked about how we can change our rendering engine in one of our earlier lessons, because we are using Metal Ray, what I want to do is utilize one of these special Metal Ray lights, either the Area Omni or the Area Spot. Now, if we use one of these lights, we do get some special abilities with our shadows. So I'm going to take something like the Area Spot, and for the most part, this works exactly like a regular light. So just simply start wherever we want the light source to be, click and drag to where we want the light source to be aimed. There we go, and whenever we're done, just right-click to get out of our light creation mode. Now we'll come back in here, maybe move this light to the side so we can actually see some of the shadows from this. So for the most part, this Area Spot, it has pretty much all of the exact same controls as a standard spotlight, so same intensity controls, attenuation. One difference that you will notice is with this Area Spot or the Area Omni, by default it is set to use ray trace shadows. So if we come in and take a quick look at this, let's just render this out. Alright, and you can see that with these area, or rather these ray trace shadows, we do have some advantages in that we don't have that same level of pixelization that we do with the shadow map. Also, if you get in here and look fairly closely, you can see that these ray trace shadows are actually obeying the transparency of this sort of a glass cockpit. So where we have sort of a transparent object or a transparent material, we're actually picking up a little bit of that color in the shadows, which is exactly what we would expect to see in real life. So these ray trace shadows are definitely going to be much more physically accurate. The downside is that these ray trace shadows, when compared to the shadow maps, the ray trace definitely takes a little bit longer to render. Now if we come in here, and with our ray trace shadows enabled, we do have this ray trace shadow parameter. And really, when you take a look at the parameters here, we really don't have that many controls in here. We have a bias, which controls the height of the shadows off of the surface. So typically though, I find that most of these options you'll want to more or less leave alone. These are pretty much good the way they are. So when it comes to dropping in these shadow maps, or rather these ray trace shadows, everything is pretty much there and ready to go. Now, the advantage of using the Area Spot to create your ray trace shadows is that we have the ability now with this type of a light to actually create soft shadows. Now that's not an ability that we have with the standard lights for like the Target Spot, the Direct, or the Omni. So if we're using a Metal Ray area light, we have this area light parameters right down here. Now what that gives us the ability to do is, instead of having the light act as though it's coming from one tiny little point in space, with this control we can actually have the light act as though it's coming from a larger area. And if you've ever seen light that comes through a window, or if you've ever seen something like a diffuser in a photography studio, that larger diffuse light creates softer, more diffuse shadows. So if we come in here with the default settings, you can see that we're getting relatively sharp shadows all across here. Now if we come in here, and for this area light, we can come in here and start to increase its size. So let's take this up to maybe 20 by 20. So it's going to simulate light that comes from a much larger area. And now, remember what this looked like before. In fact, what we can do is come in here and just clone that so we can have something to compare it to. Now when we come in and render this, again, what we should now see is a much, much softer shadow. Now this is actually what we would expect to see in real life, where we have some much more diffuse shadows sort of out here. And what's nice is that these are actually physically accurate, so As we start to get closer and closer to the shadow casting source, you'll notice that the shadows get sharper and sharper. That's exactly the way that things behave in the real world. And that is the type of control that we get whenever we start to enable these ray trace shadows together with the mental ray area light type. Okay, now if you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of these other shadow types that we have here, we actually do talk about these in quite a bit more detail in our Introduction to Lighting course in 3ds Max. So like I said before, if you want to learn more about some of these different shadows, some of the different lights, some of the more specialized controls, then once you've had a chance to finish up this course, I would highly recommend taking a look at our Introduction to Lighting course. Okay, so for now, that's a look at how we can start to work with the ray trace shadows and some of the benefits that they provide inside of 3ds Max.